Life in the mixed city of Lindheim was a symphony of controlled chaos. By the first light, elven gardeners tended to hanging gardens on terraces while orc stevedores were already rolling barrels by the warehouses. And somewhere in between, in a high tower of a former elven library, Cain was waking up. His workshop was his fortress. Here reigned a perfect, sterile order, a stark contrast to the street-esque chaos. Brushes lined up by size, pots with paints made from rare minerals and plants, and books. Many books. He was not just a scribe. He was the last apprentice of old Master Ilios, the man who taught him that every letter in the sacred text must breathe and every miniature must tell a story. But the master died a year ago, and since then, work had become not a calling for Cain, but a refuge. His main client now was the Council of Three, the city's ruling body. He was designing official decrees about peace. The irony didn't escape him. With his own hands, he was glorifying a harmony he himself barely believed in. His own world was limited to a root, tower, market for provisions, scriptorium in the lower city, tower. He was a ghost in a city of the living. One morning, buying apples from an old elven woman, he heard two human teenagers teasing a young orc boy trying to sell crudely carved whistles. "Look, the green one is trying, thinks he can make something." The orc boy stayed silent, clutching his crafts, his eyes pools of shame and anger. Cain intervened, quietly saying, "Leave him alone." The teenagers, seeing an adult though an unimpressive one, sheepishly walked away. Cain bought one whistle, placed a coin in the boy's hand, and left without waiting for thanks. All the way home, he turned the rough bird figurine in his hands. It held a sincerity his own perfect, soulless letters lacked. The decision to go to the crossroads simmered for a week. It was prompted by an incident in the scriptorium. A young elven aristocrat, commissioning a family tree, spoke dismissively of the new fashion for orcish style and the ugly sounds of their so-called music. In Cain's mind flashed a familiar picture, the orc boy's face at the market. That evening, he put on his best, though worn, caftan and went to the square. The tavern, the crossroads, was a microcosm of Lindheim. Gnome barkeep Barney, with a gold chain on his mighty torso, directed the chaos with the calm of a field commander. In a corner, three silver-bearded elves played a complex board game. At the counter, an orc in a soot-stained apron, clearly a blacksmith, argued with a human merchant about steel quality. The air buzzed with dozens of conversations, laughter, the clink of coins. Cain found a free table by a column where he could observe while remaining nearly invisible. He ordered a mug of honey mead and sank into contemplation. And then, from behind the curtain by the small stage, she emerged. His first thought was huntress. In her posture, in the way she carried herself, was the grace of a large predator. But instead of a bow or an axe, she held a musical instrument, a long flute of dark wood. Her name was Zora. She didn't introduce herself. She simply brought the flute to her lips and began to play. And everything changed. The tavern noise didn't cease, but it retreated into the background. Her music wasn't loud. It was piercing. This wasn't a folk melody. It was something modern, urban. In the fast passages, Cain heard the clatter of hooves on cobblestone. In the low, drawn-out notes, the hum of a distant forge. In a light, almost playful motif, the rustle of leaves in the city garden. And then, in the middle of the piece, emerged a theme of loneliness. Pure, piercing, and infinitely sad. It was his theme. The theme of a man behind a glass wall. Cain forgot his mead. He watched her hands, strong and nimble, fluttering over the flute's holes. Her focused face, where small tusks lent not ferocity but astonishing sincerity. She played not for the audience, but for the music itself. And in that was the same lonely devotion to craft he knew in his tower. When the last note faded, a second of absolute silence fell. Then came applause, not raucous, but respectful. Zora nodded, a quick, businesslike nod, and turned to leave. And then from the table where the well-dressed human merchant sat, a loud, deliberately bored voice rang out. "Well, Barney, Your oddity is ruining the mood again. Was she mourning something? Let me guess, lament for a broken pot, or allergy for a lost goat. Ha ha! It was Thorin, a fabric supplier, a man whose wealth grew thanks to peace, but whose views were stuck in the past. His friends left. Zora froze. Her back straightened. Cain saw the tendons in her hand, clutching the flute, tense up. He knew that look. The same look was on the orc boy at the market. A mix of fury, pain, and humiliation. She walked away silently, her head slightly lowered, and Cain stood up, without thinking. His body moved on its own. He crossed the room and gently, but insistently, stepped into her path to the exit, placing himself between her and the merchant's table. "Excuse me," he said. His voice, hoarse from long disuse, was raspy but audible. Everyone turned. "I must disagree. What we just heard was not mourning. It was a portrait of our city, with all its rhythms, its life, and its loneliness." The tavern fell silent. Thorin's eyebrows rose. "Oh, another connoisseur of high art. And who might you be, friend?" Cain ignored him. He turned to Zora, up close. She was even more imposing, but in her eyes, raised to him, he saw not rage, but stunned curiosity. "Thank you," he said to her, his voice softening. "That was incredible. Does this melody have a name?" She looked at him, studying. She saw simple clothes, warning stains on his fingers, a thin face, and eyes that held neither mockery nor fear, only sincere admiration. "No," she finally answered. Her voice was low, velvety, with a guttural accent that made ordinary words sound like distant thunder. "It just comes when I listen to the city. My name is Cain." "Zora," she said, and something at the corner of her mouth twitched, hinting at a smile. Barney, sensing a possible brawl, rolled over, grinning broadly. "Ah, Cain. Good to see you. And you, Zora? Splendid as always. Hey, Molly, bring our guests the best mead on the house. Please sit down." And to the approving murmur of the tavern, most patrons were tired of Thorin too. Cain and Zora found themselves at a small table in that very corner. Their conversation began with awkwardness. Cain asked about the instrument. She said she made it herself, from ebony that grew on the border of her clan's lands. She learned to play by imitating the sounds of winding canyons and water beating against stones. In her clan, the Grey Crags, music was tolerated only as a signal to attack or a victory song. Her desire to play useless melodies was seen as weakness, almost madness. "My father said my hands were made for holding a spear, not this. Stick with holes," she said without emotion, but Cain heard an ocean of pain beneath that layer of ice. In return, he spoke of letters, how each had character, a soul. How illumination wasn't just decoration, but an extension of the text, its emotion given color. He spoke of his teacher, of the scriptorium as silence, which rang louder in his ears than any noise. They spoke of the city. She saw it as a collection of sounds and rhythms. He as a collection of texts and symbols carved in stone. She knew all the best spots where echoes behaved differently. He knew on which old buildings to find half-erased elven runes or symbols of the first human settlers. They met every evening, first only at the crossroads. Then they started taking walks. Their strolls became a legend for the few who noticed. A tall, powerful orc woman and a thin, thoughtful human man wandering the night city, talking animatedly or just listening in silence. Cain invited her to his tower. She entered his sanctuary not as a barbarian, but as an initiate. She looked at his works, and in her eyes he saw not just approval, but understanding. She alone saw how the sorrow in his recent miniatures contrasted with the official optimism of the decree texts. He came to her performance elsewhere in a little basement in the Orc Quarter, where others like her, outcast artists, gathered. There her music was different, raw, more emotional, sometimes angry, and he understood that the version she played at the crossroads was already filtered, adapted for foreign ears. Her true art was here, and he felt honored she had let him into this sanctuary. Once she brought him a gift, a small amulet of polished stone with a mountain vein. For luck in your work, she said, looking away shyly. He, with trembling hands, gave her in return a small parchment bookmark on which he had inscribed her name in gold, surrounded by a pattern of flutes and musical notes. She clutched it in her palm like something priceless. What grew between them wasn't just affection, it was co-creation. He began sketching to her music, and she once played a melody that, as she confessed, was inspired by one of his miniatures, a dragon coiled around the world tree. Their worlds began to merge, but shadows gathered. The stares on the streets grew heavier, the whispers louder. Look, that weirdo with his green friend again. What does he see in her? A disgrace, seeing a human with an orc. Thorin, stung by his humiliation at the crossroads, began a campaign. He was an influential member of the Merchants Guild. He hinted to Barney that many respectable clients were displeased with such blatant mixing in his establishment. Pressure was put on Cain indirectly. An old elf for whom he sometimes did book restoration politely refused him, citing a sudden lack of funds. Rumors spread through the boarding house that Cain's unbecoming behavior compromises the establishment's reputation. The culmination was a visit to Cain from a manager of the Council of Three, an elf named Lyrander. Your work is impeccable, Cain, he said, standing in the middle of the workshop and fastidiously avoiding touching anything. But the council is not just a legislative body. It is also a symbol of stability and propriety. Your personal life is beginning to attract unwanted attention. It harms the image, and consequently, your work for us. It would be wise to exercise prudence. The threat hung in the air, unspoken. Cain was silent. Inside, everything boiled. After Lyrander left, for the first time in his life, he threw something in an empty paint pot. It shattered against the wall, leaving a blue stain. He met Zora in their garden by the wall. He was dejected. He told her everything about Lyrander, the rumors, his fears. He expected her to get angry, snarl, clench her fists. But she just lowered her head. I knew this would happen, she said quietly. I just hoped with you it would be different. But your world, Cain, is as rigid as mine. Just different rules. Here you can punch a face for an insult. Here they hit quietly through money, reputation, hints. And I don't know how to fight in such a war. So we give up, he asked, bitterness in his voice. I don't want to be the one who ruins your life. You are an artist. You have a gift. You must create. And I will always be a problem, just in different ways, in different places. At that moment, they emerged from the bushes. Thorin and three of his friends. They were clearly tipsy, but not enough to not know what they were doing. Thorin smirked. Oh, a romantic rendezvous among the ruins. How touching. Deciding where you'll take her next. Bookworm. To the National Library, or to Euretics so she can play you a lullaby. Zora stood up. Her entire figure radiated threat. Leave, Thorin. Ah, she defends. Thorin feigned surprise. Don't worry, Greenie, I won't touch your fragile escort. Although, he could use some masculinity. Maybe we'll teach him like real men, so he forgets you and remembers who he is. One of his friends, a burly loader, took a step forward. Cain saw Zora instinctively fall into a fighting stance, one she probably knew from childhood. She was ready to fight for him, and in that instant, something in Cain broke, or, on the contrary, clicked into place. All the fear, all the indecision, his entire life lived by others' rules, burned away in a white-hot rage. But it was a cold rage, the rage of a quill, not a sword. He didn't rush into a fight. He took a step forward, placing himself in front of Zora. shielding her. His movement was so unexpected the loader stopped. "Thorin," Cain said. His voice was quiet, metallic, absolutely calm. He wasn't shouting, he was pronouncing. "You speak of masculinity. You who are afraid of the sound of a flute. You who built your wealth on peace but in your soul yearn for war. So you have someone to feel superior to." Thorin was dumbfounded. His smirk slid off his face. "You called her art lament. You were wrong. It is a mirror, and it showed you your own wretchedness, your emptiness, which can be filled with money or power over others. You mock her because her talent is real, and your life is a farce." Cain took another step towards the loader. His eyes burned with cold blue flame. "You want to hit me. Hit! But know this. Tomorrow your face will be on every caricature in every tavern in this city. Your name will become synonymous with a coward who beats up artists. Your business will collapse. Because I am not a warrior. I am a chronicler, and I decide what enters the history of this day and what is consigned to oblivion. Strike, and become a grotesque footnote." Silence fell in the garden. The loader looked at this thin, blazing with fierce resolve creature and retreated. Thorin was crimson. He opened his mouth but found no words. He saw not a frightened oddball, but a fanatic. And fanatics are no joke. You're insane," he finally spat out and, nodding to his stunned friends, quickly left. When they were gone, Cain suddenly felt his knees buckle. All energy left him. He would have fallen if strong hands hadn't caught him. Zora held him. She silently pressed his head to her shoulder. He felt her heart beating fast, strong. "No one ever," she spoke haltingly, her voice trembling. "No one ever stood up for me like that. No one ever said such words. You were like a rock. I just told the truth," he whispered. "No, you fought a battle and won it. Not with fists, with words, with your art." She pulled back to look at his face. Tears welled in her eyes. "You are the most courageous man I know, Cain." They sat like that for a long time until night fully descended upon the garden. That evening, they didn't talk about the future. They simply were together. But something had changed forever. The next day, Cain went to Barney. He didn't ask. He handed him a perfectly designed contract. Not for a menu, for permanent cooperation. Cain offered to design all the tavern's official papers, advertisements, and even the gnome as personal petitions for free, on one condition. Zora was a permanent, untouchable artist of the crossroads, and their corner table was their personal territory. Barney, scratching the back of his head, muttered, "Thorin already moved his accounts to the Golden Hammer. But to hell with him. Here at the crossroads, we've always had our own law." "All right. Deal!" Then Cain went to the council's scriptorium. He didn't ask for an audience with Lyranda. He submitted the finished decree on new trade duties, and with it his resignation as the council's chief calligrapher. Brief, polite, without explanation. The news spread instantly. The resignation of the council's artist over personal differences was a scandal, and when the true reasons leaked, opinions split. Some called him a fool and a traitor to his race. Others, especially among young elves and free-thinking humans, saw it as a romantic and principled act. But Cain was free. He opened a small private studio. New clients came, not state ones, but private. Scholars, collectors, even wealthy merchants who wanted not just an official document, but a work of art. He became more expensive and more independent. As for Zora, her fame grew. The story of how a humble calligrapher dueled a rich merchant for an orc musician became a city legend. People now came to the crossroads for her music too. She began experimenting, blending orc rhythms with elven melodies and human harmonies. Her music became a hymn to Lindheim itself, complex, contradictory, but alive. 6 months passed. One evening, on the roof of his tower, now her roof too, Zora placed a leather pouch in front of him. "What is this?" he asked. "My savings." and a proposal. She told him about a vacant space in the artisan quarter, not far from the crossroads, about a small courtyard with a fountain, about her dream, not a tavern, but a music salon, a place to listen to live music without the clatter of beer mugs, where musicians of all races could play what they wanted, not what the audience expected. But a space alone isn't enough, she said. It needs a soul. It needs imagery, so that upon entering, a person feels this isn't just a hall, that it is a different place. Cain looked into her burning eyes. He took the pouch, weighed it in his hand, then took out his own heavier one. My savings and my agreement. They called it Echo. On the sign Cain created, a human hand holding a brush and an orc hand holding a flute were depicted. Their fingers almost touched, and from the point of near contact, sound waves radiated out, turning into intricate patterns and letters in different languages. The opening became an event. Not only their friends came, the curious came. Even old Barney came, grunting approvingly, creating competition, are we. And, to everyone as surprised, the orc boy from the market came, now a grown apprentice carver. He silently gave Zora a new, skillfully carved flute stand. The first concert at Echo was given by Zora, but it wasn't her usual set. It was a new suite. It was called Pages and Sounds. Cain sat in the front row, and as she played, he recognized his own work in the music. Drawn out, meditative passages his golden ornaments. Bright, cheerful bursts his illuminated initials. Solemn, powerful chords the headings of official decrees. And woven through it all a leitmotif. The theme of two solitudes that found each other and became whole. A theme that began sadly but by the finale gained confidence, warmth, and boundless hope. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause. Zora searched for his eyes in the crowd, and found them. Later, when the guests had left, they remained alone in the empty hall. Moonlight fell through a high window onto the brand new stage, still smelling of wood and paint. We did it, Zora said quietly. We've only just begun, Cain replied, taking her hand. Far beyond the window, the great city of Lindheim buzzed and shimmered with lights. A city of prejudice and fear. A city of noise and bustle. But here, in this small point of silence and harmony, something new had been born. Not just love between a human and an orc. A joint symphony had been born. A symphony whose first note had sounded in a noisy tavern when a quiet man found the courage to speak. And its echo would resonate for a very long time.